welcome to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We're two physical therapists living the life in Las Vegas. I'm Dr. Erica.
And I'm Dr. Joe. We created this podcast for two reasons. First, to connect the healthcare, wellness, and fitness communities in Las Vegas. And second, to highlight all the amazing people we've met along the way.
Thank you for listening, and remember to take care of yourself.
Katie Susskind Risso is an associate athletic trainer at Stanford University, working primarily with the women's lacrosse and sailing teams. She also serves as the primary injury spotter for the football program. She serves as the Far West Athletic Trainers Association Public Relations Committee Chair.
All right, Katie Susskind Risso, thank you for being on La Vida Las Vegas podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. So we're going to get started. I know you are, based out of Silicon Valley or the Palo Alto area in the Bay Area, but let's talk a little bit about Vegas. About how many times have you been to Vegas?
Probably more than I can count at this point, both for business and pleasure. We have had our national athletic trainers meeting in Vegas a couple times, and then we also have our district meeting there because Nevada is actually part of our district. So I've been several times for business. It's always, I feel like it's hard to say that you go to Vegas for just business. Usually there's like a little fun mixed in there just because of where it is. And then I've come obviously for fun for the same reasons that everybody else comes for fun. So yeah, pretty familiar. In the last few years, ventured kind of off the strip into actual Vegas, because as we get older, the strip has less, for some of us, has less kind of allure. So yeah.
What is your favorite thing about as a business conference at for example, the National Athletic Training Conference? What's the best part about that?
I think it's mostly because the hotels are so big, you can usually all be housed in the same place. Sometimes when we have it in Indiana or St. Louis, you're spread out a bit more, but because the hotels are so big and they're kind of suited for these massive gatherings, it does lend itself well to a bit more sense of community, and you kind of run into people in the elevator or the hallways, and you have these one-off conversations, which I feel like often are much more valuable than those planned things every once in a while.
I tend to agree on that. When we're at any type of conference that we're at, we tend to get more information from just the elevator conversations
casual.
Yeah, that's great. And then how about favorite things off the strip that you've done?
Let's see. I think we've gone to a couple really good restaurants. Obviously one of the taquerias, which was so good. And kind of just learning that there's this world outside of the strip I think is really important. And especially now that you live there and having somebody to visit and do the less touristy things, I think it's really fun. Being able to see what's beyond that.
Definitely.
So have you ever done any of the outdoor activities that Vegas has to offer?
Let's see. I'm trying to think. Not really. I'm trying to think if I've hiked. I don't think so. But I want to. I mean, that's definitely in something I would want to do because I know there's really good hiking and a lot more activities. Not so good with the heat, but I'm sure if we went at 6 a.m. it would be okay.
In December. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or December when it's ideal temperature.
Didn't you do the Horseshoe Bend and the other one?
But that's not Vegas, right?
But it's still close.
Yes. So the last time I was at Vegas or for a convention, we flew in and then we drove, I think it's 4.5 or 4 hours to Page, Arizona. And then we did Horseshoe Bend and we did Antelope Canyon, which was so cool. Not a national park because it's Navajo land, so you still have to pay to get on it, but you're paying directly to the Navajo Nation, and then you do a tour and all that stuff. So yeah, that was really picturesque, beautiful, very, very cool. There's a good barbecue spot there. Obviously we hit that up, so it's good.
Speaking of barbecue and food in general, what is your favorite cheat meal?
Mexican, for sure.
Tell us more about these burritos and tacos that you consume.
That I consume. Um, so there's this new burrito place in Redwood City that's really good, and they have a shrimp. It's called El Camarón Diablo, so like spicy shrimp burrito. It's really, really good. Then we have like our normal kind of haunt, like our kind of hole in the wall place that we always go. I lived in Santa Barbara for 2.5 years, and there's so much good Mexican food down in Southern California and Santa Barbara. So, I mean, it's just if I'm eating a burrito or a taco, I'm usually happy. It's kind of
Same
as
here.
simple as that. Yeah.
If you have one choice of meat, what's your go-to between?
Probably carne asada. It's hard to mess that up.
Nice choice. More of an al pastor girl myself, but you know.
Yeah, I know. I agree with you, but I've also had it where I was like, oh, you know, like it can be very, very good. The ceiling is higher, but carne asada, I feel like, is a very consistently safe choice.
I agree. That's definitely the case.
So tell us who you are and what you do.
Okay. So I am an associate athletic trainer at Stanford. What that means is I work in a traditional athletic training sense. So for those that may not be familiar with an athletic trainer, we are an allied healthcare professional working often with kind of the active patient or athlete, and focusing on injury prevention, injury treatment, case management, rehabilitation, and emergency preparedness. So for those that aren't familiar with an athletic trainer, the easiest way to describe it is the people that run out onto the field when you're watching a football game and somebody gets injured. But obviously that's a pretty narrow scope. That is what I do because I work in the traditional setting. I work with women's lacrosse and sailing, and then I am our injury spotter, which is a newer role for athletic trainers. So during football games, I sit up in the booth on the same level as like the press and the media, and I watch the game, and I have the same replay system that the refs do. So if there's an injury, I'm able to replay it, really break it down, send video down to the field to our team docs if they need a little bit more information on how exactly the knee bent or something like that. And then I also am watching the game and then watching the field. So if something happens and in the off chance that our medical staff missed it, maybe a hit to the head that was kind of looking harmless, but he's stumbling off the field and nobody noticed, then I can radio down and have him give that guy a second look or check him out. So yes, I work in what we call the traditional sense of athletic training, but it's a very kind of growing field in the healthcare professional, typically working with an active individual, military, industrial, emerging settings, weekend warriors, pro, dance, performing arts, kind of that whole gamut.
Very cool. So how did you get into that? Like what made you want to be an athletic trainer?
So I think Erica can probably attest to our undergraduate education. We both were interns in the athletic training room. So I started at UC Davis, always knowing I wanted to do science, but kind of moving between pre-med, pre-vet, not really sure. And then my freshman year, my freshman year roommate was in the internship because she was an athlete who hurt herself. And then she joined the athletic training internship. And in doing that, she was just basically working at kind of a lower level within our athletic training facilities as a volunteer. But I talked to her a bit and she kind of explained to me what it was. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a perfect kind of marriage. Cause at that point I knew I still wanted to do science and healthcare, but I wasn't 100% sold on medicine as a physician. So being somebody that grew up playing sports and loving sports, I found athletic training being a very easy kind of joint way to do both those things.
As you work now currently with the lacrosse and sailing team, you've previously worked, with different athletes and such, but
yeah,
as you work through different sport demands and dynamics, so how has that basically changed, and like how do you get to more like a specialty type of thing, or do you notice that there's a big transition going from sport to sport as an athletic trainer?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think you have these baseball athletic trainers or football athletic trainers or even lacrosse and sailing athletic trainers. And I think, you know, I personally think the beautiful thing about athletic training is that we have the ability, like we're pretty adaptable. And like, yes, there was a learning curve when I joined and started working with lacrosse, but I had never worked with lacrosse before. But it wasn't as if my healthcare suffered. I had to ask a few more questions. And in that case, you kind of ask the coaches or the players or kind of people who have worked with that sport before and just get a little bit of an idea. But I mean, if you're evaluating a knee, a torn ACL will present regardless of if it's a football player or a lacrosse player. But I think the intricacies in sport specialization for athletic trainers comes with the return to play. So obviously the return to play for a lacrosse player is going to be different than a swimmer, than a sailor, than a football player, than a baseball player. If we're going to go with the knee example. So I think that's where the specialization kind of comes. But I think that, and especially in college athletics specifically, I think it's great because you have the opportunity to work with so many different sports. I mean, Stanford has 36. Unfortunately, we're going down to 25. Still 25 different sports to kind of learn and hone. And I mean, that's the whole point of the healthcare profession, is to continue to learn. So to have different sports to work with, I think we're really lucky. And then having a little bit of specialization to help you in the return to play process is really helpful.
Do you ever notice how within the same sport, you see a lot of the same kinds of injuries?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the obvious things would be like baseball, shoulders and elbows, and then cross country, shins, ankles, and feet. But yeah, you see these trends, and I think that's where immersing yourself in the sport that you're working is really going to help you out, because if it is something that is sport specific, learning about the sport and why it happens is going to help you prevent it. And that's kind of like the long term or the short term versus long term play. Like when I first got into lacrosse, it was like, okay, I have to kind of understand what I'm doing here. It took me about a year to get my kind of feet wet. And then once I kind of got comfortable, it was like worked a lot with my sports performance coach. And I was like, okay, how do we make a pre-season screen to look at these things and identify these weaknesses? Maybe it's like a weakness between the contralateral leg from where you shoot or something. And then can we strengthen this to prevent injury? Like, is this where our left-sided patella tendonitis is coming from, or our right-sided hip pain and FAI? What can we look at and identify to prevent these in the future? And that's where I think the longer you've been in a sport, the better you kind of have a handle on that.
Take us a little bit through that thought process, right? Because you have a season and then you also have kind of the off-season training and such. But at what point are you evaluating that data and being like, hey, like, 6 weeks in, like we're noticing a lot of things. Do we need to change it right then? Or are you more like hey, let's like look at all this data that we have and like kind of reevaluate how we're programming, or like tell us a little bit how you look at that.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing, okay, so data collection is kind of the next wave within all college sports, I think, and then pro and even high school. And I think that's the beauty of having a team, because you get this data pool, right? But when you're collecting data, I think one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to collect it without a plan. Let me put this heart rate monitor on you and get your heart rate, but what am I going to do with it? I don't know. So we actually use Catapult, and I give a lot of kind of props to my sport performance coach, John Snyder, for doing a lot of the groundwork on that. And he'll get all that data and we'll look at it. And so our process is twofold, in that I typically see the trends as they present injury wise, and he often sees the trends as they present like objectively in the data. So it's kind of our process to work together on this. And I'll give you an example. So we'll have like a rash of hamstring pain, not a hamstring tear, but like kind of like subclinical hamstring pain, where it's like, I'm really sore, I feel really tight, my objective exam is fairly normal, our range of motion is about the same bilaterally, and there's no strength deficit, there's no bruising, nothing really like on exam, but it hurts, something's sore, something's tight, something's pulling. Okay, so then, and I'll get like 5 of these in like a week. So it's like, okay, there's something up here. So then we'll go back to the data and the Catapult data, and we'll look and we'll see that, oh, it's all midfielders, and they did this new drill where they did a ton of decelerations. It's like, okay, so what do we need to do? Do we need to help train them to strengthen that weaker hamstring so they don't get that pain when they decelerate? Or do we need to modify practice and put in less of this drill that is causing this injury? Or it's like a quick start off the 8-meter, which is kind of like the penalty shot for lacrosse. So it's the ability to take the data and pair it with what you're seeing real time in the injury evaluation that gives you the ability to truly prevent injury and then modify practice and go from there. And the biggest thing that you can get in this injury prevention data usage process is coach buy-in. So like, I can go up there and my sports performance coach can go up there and we tell our coach that we're seeing this trend and here's the objective data to support it. But if your coach isn't bought in, you're not necessarily gonna have as big of effect. So it's kind of you guys identifying these trends, being able to explain it to the coach, and then the coach saying, yeah, okay, let's add this in the weight room so they get more strong, and then I will do half as many reps of that exercise so we don't get this problem again.
Very cool. How do you feel are the athletes pretty bought in this process as well? Or are there times when they're still hesitant to talk about injury because they're scared that means they can't play or that they're not being tough enough?
Yeah, it's kind of, again, I would say a lot of that kind of trickles down from the coaching staff, in college athletics specifically. But I think that the athlete that we're dealing with today, and again, I work with a college age student, so I'm going to generalize within that college age student, but I think the athletes that we're seeing today in college like objective data. They are hungry to learn more about how they can improve performance, and objective data is one of those things that they can't argue with. So it's like, I'm so tired, I don't know why I'm so tired. And then I look up their data, I'm like, well, maybe there's something else going on here because your Catapult data isn't unusual. Like, you're not doing more reps, you're not having more high speed accelerations. Like, I wonder if maybe it's something outside of the physical realm, and so I think that they are really bought into this idea of objective data because it can help explain some of the things that maybe we didn't have the proof to explain before.
Could you explain Catapult just so people
know? Sorry. So Catapult's just a company that we use. So again, no plugs, no like commercial affiliation here or anything like that. There are a lot of different monitoring systems. We use Catapult because it uses GPS. So it's not heart rate monitor. It looks at high speed accelerations, total workload, total mileage, decelerations, quick starts, that kind of thing, using GPS technology. And it's a little puck. It's about like this big. And they have a little like sports bra type thing. And there's a little pocket in the back, and it goes in the back. And then they wear it for practice and for weights usually. And it records that data.
Very cool.
And then, so you have a sports performance coach. What does that entail in how does it fit in with everything else that's going on with the healthcare team with athletics?
So I use the term sports performance coach carefully because that's the term that they would like to be referred to as, but it's kind of like what everybody has called a strength and conditioning coach before. Okay. So it's that's the terminology now, I guess. But when I say sports performance coach, I mean strength and conditioning. So the sports performance coach I work with, he designs all their lifting programs, designs all their conditioning, and then works with me on injury trends, pre-season screening, and then some practice stuff. And we have meetings. The two of us have meetings with our coach every Tuesday. I'm trying to think. Yes, every Tuesday. Where we all sit down and we kind of talk about the week.
And then take us through kind of the day in the life, or just like in general, who is all working with in the world of athletics, athletic training, who else is involved in someone's care as an athlete?
Yeah, it depends on the athlete, but we'll go through like all kind of the resources. Again, my major disclaimer on this is that I work at a Power 5 university that has the funding to have a lot of these things. So it's kind of an ideal model. And I know that in a lot of other colleges, they don't have all of these resources. And maybe some colleges have more. But for me, we have, so this healthcare model, we kind of look at it as like a hub. So for us, the athletic trainer is the hub. The athletic trainer sits in the middle and they kind of direct all these other spokes off the wheel. So we have, and that's just mostly because we see them every day. So that doesn't mean I do everything. Very, very far from it. But usually it means that I am directing the care. And so I sit in the middle and somebody comes to me with a problem, an injury, whatever it is. And then I evaluate that and figure out which of these spokes they need to visit. So we have our team physician. Typically that's the first stop for most injury things that aren't getting treated in the athletic training room. So we have a team physician who's assigned to lacrosse. She is a general medicine practitioner, family practice. And then from her, that can spike off to be a specialist, either an ortho or potentially an internist if it's something like an internal injury we can't treat, or some other specialist, endocrinologist, women's health, something like that. So we kind of have that physician piece. Typically the referral starts with the athletic trainer to the team physician, and then the team physician manages. We also have a neurologist and a whole specialized concussion team. So concussion, I feel like I could fill a whole podcast with concussion, so we won't get too deep into it, but we have kind of a different pathway for concussion, and that includes the starting with a team physician, and that can branch off to a neurologist, a PT that specializes in vestibular PT, a neuropsychologist, a psychiatrist, and then any other things that need to be done if it's depending how serious it may be. And then kind of on this wheel, we have our physical therapy. So we at Stanford are really lucky. We have 5 physical therapists who are in the athletics umbrella. So they just treat student athletes. And so typically they work with our long-term cases. So the ACL rehab, the, the total shoulder or the labrum replacement, any of these things, Tommy John surgery. And typically they're kind of managing that long-term rehab. And we as the athletic trainer will supplement that. And so they work in a separate building, but they are under athletics, work with us full time, and they're fantastic. They all have obviously specialty within athletics. And then a few of them, as I mentioned, also have a specialty with vestibular PT. So they do a secondary concussion assessment, which is great and really, really eye-opening to some of the things that may be going on with a concussion that we don't see with our basic SCAT-5 forms or any of those things. It's really interesting, all of the balance stuff. So we have PTs, physicians, sports performance coaches, which I kind of mentioned. We have sports psychology. So we have two specialized clinicians who are, board certified psychologists specializing in sport and physical activity, who can either manage a case themselves or again refer to a more specialized person if maybe it's a female athlete issue and there's some eating disorder or disordered eating and they maybe need to see a specialist within that, or if medicine needs to be prescribed, they would see a psychiatrist, stuff like that. So you have like that mental health piece. Then there's kind of these other specialists, massage therapy. We have a couple massage therapists who come in and work specifically with our student athletes. And then at some places they have chiropractors. We don't employ chiropractors here at Stanford, or we don't contract with any, but at a lot of other universities, they're another kind of spoke of that wheel that maybe the athletic trainer can refer to the chiropractor if it's something that they would specialize in and the athletic trainer can't manage. I'm trying to think if I forgot anybody on the wheel.
Nutrition or dietetics?
Yeah, there you go, nutrition. I did forget somebody. So then we also have a sports nutrition department who are registered dietitians, and they're, again, fantastic. They've all done some sort of like internship or kind of fellowship residency within sports. So they have the registered dietitian side, and then they also have kind of a specialty in sports. And ours are phenomenal, and offer just so much good insight. And again, I work mostly with females, so I look at the female athlete health piece of it very seriously, and they are such an important piece when we are managing an eating disorder or disordered eating body composition case. Okay, I think now I got all of them. There's a lot.
Yeah. So a question, I guess, for now, kind of we're totally outside the realm of, college athletics, but in our general life, as we work with athletes who are, trying to improve their performance, whether that's through nutrition or mindset or physically or, mentally, whatever that may be, how much access do they have to working with kind of the specifically the dietitians and the sports psychology? Is it like, hey, I just have this question, I can just call them randomly and make an appointment, or like, how does that process work?
Yeah, it's both. So it can either be a referral out of medical need, or it can be kind of a self-referral. And they don't always have to go through me either. Obviously, there's some stigma with mental health and even dietitians. So our sports psychologists and dietitians usually meet with our team at least once a year just to introduce themselves and say, hey, like, Katie can refer you, but I can also see you. Here's my email. If you want to see me and you don't want it to go through the coaches or Katie, just email or text. Basically, it's about access and about, there's no ego, right? Like, I'm not going to be mad if they don't go through me for this service, because if they're getting this service and they need it, then they're getting better, and that's what matters. So just that availability to them, I think, is really important. And it can be something as silly as, like, I think I'm allergic to eggs, like, what should I do? Or it can be something more serious where it's like, I'm having a hard time controlling my eating. What should I do? And obviously, like, we all know that we can't handle those complex problems alone. So if, the referrals go both ways. So if our dietitian sees something and is talking to a student athlete and realizes that, hey, maybe they need to see our team physician, or we need to loop in sports performance because it's a energy imbalance issue, then we will do that. So, I put the athletic trainer at the center of the hub in a typical kind of flow chart, but it can go either way for sure. And a lot of times it does go that way, especially with sports psychology and them seeing them, and it just being really the most important thing, that they're getting access to those resources regardless of who refers them.
So what's something that you commonly see in your practice that you wish more people knew?
Good question. I think, again, I don't want to generalize too much, but I am finding that the prevalence of mental health services to the age group that I work with is astronomically high. And I don't know if that's because it's being more diagnosed, or because that specific age group is just prone to it, or under a lot of stress, or whatever socioeconomic things you want to kind of look at. But
Twitter.
I am finding, Twitter, social media, no, seriously, I mean, I am finding more and more that, number one, athletes are not immune to mental health kind of disorders or disturbances. In fact, they often are more prone to certain types: anxiety, perfectionism, any of these things that go along with being a high performing athlete. I mean, we can all kind of attest to, like, there's this kind of crazy mentality you need to reach the top. I mean, no Olympian has ever gotten to the Olympics without like an insane drive and dedication and commitment. But a lot of times with that comes anxiety and depression and feeling alone and all these other things that I think we don't realize. And I think it's so good because there is a light being shown on it. I mean, we're having Michael Phelps do like commercials for mental health care, and LeBron James, and they're like having their pieces in the Calm app and all of this stuff. So I think it's great. I think we're getting there, but I still think not everybody realizes that this generation of younger kids, again, I only can speak to the population that I work with, are really affected by mental health. And I think it can often help them kind of reach that next level if they seek that support. Again, not that it's a simple fix, but oftentimes we get kids who haven't had any mental health services or support, and it makes a huge difference within like 6 months of them seeing somebody.
I think that's tough too, because it's a time in their lives that they're in a lot of transition,
Totally.
right? So, think about going back, like when I was in college, it's just a new
Right.
place, being on your own, being free. But then you also have the demands of, a prestigious university. You are a student athlete. You have to maintain a social life. I think it's just a lot in general, but I think that's a great point that you bring up. Just like learning how to manage some of those new things and new stressors, because
Totally.
I think as an 18 to 21-year-old, you're still maturing in general, right? There's so many brain neurons developing, and like, your neural connections are really, play a big role at that age. And still, like, even like they think the adult brain doesn't actually technically mature in some senses until you're like 21 to 23. So I think
Totally.
but it's a great point, because if you, in a sense, able to manage it or figure out strategies to help you through some of that stuff, the easier those pathways develop later on in life. So I think that's a great point
Right.
that you bring up, to basically address it early on.
Yeah. And I think especially there's some gender differences in it too. Like, we know that, women, I mean, we don't say like women mature later or earlier than men, but like there's some data that suggests their brains may actually look different at the same age. And so keeping all that in mind too, because I get an 18-year-old male and an 18-year-old female, and like they could be at totally different neural brain development stages. So it's like, it's kind of just that awareness. I agree.
So talking, just generally speaking, we have different phases of athletics as kids age. So you go into like middle school age, right? You go to high school athletics. Now we're talking about college. So the college athletes that you have now worked with are already at a high level, and they were probably the best in their sport at the time, right? Enough to get into a Division I school, and compete at a really high level. But what are some of the things that you see that they might be missing, either in their training or life or mental capacity or whatever, that I don't want to say mental capacity, but just in a sense, like, what is it, something that you think is in a sense missing in their program?
Yeah, I think it's two things. So I don't know how like familiar you guys are with this term, imposter syndrome, but I think a lot of our student athletes experience that. And I think a lot of high level student athletes do, because, and again, I only really speak to Stanford because I've spent the most time here, but I mean, these kids not only have been the best athletes in their school, they've also been the best students. So they get to a place where maybe they're not on the starting roster, and then they're also not the best student. That's tough. So kind of just being aware that they're going to feel that way coming in, like the big fish in a small pond, small fish in a big pond kind of like reversal. It's really, really hard. And I think all college students go through that to an extent, for sure. And I think like professionals do too. I mean, I still feel it some days. I'm like, oh my God, why is everybody smarter around me? But you learn to get to a point where you embrace that. But that takes a lot of practice and a lot of maturity and a lot of like being through it. So I think that's like one big thing, is like talking these things out with their teammates and realizing that they're all feeling the same way and that it's okay. And then whether or not that's then having to go see a specialist or having team meetings or having the coaches talk about it or sharing our experiences as kind of like, I'm not a student athlete and I wasn't a student athlete, but I'm still like a grown up compared to them, if you will. And so sometimes I'll be like, hey, like, I know that feeling, like, let's talk about it. And if it's something that like they could benefit, like talking to one of our sports psychologists, then like, yeah, let's also go that route. So I think that's like the first thing, is just like being okay with being uncomfortable. That's big. And then the second thing, kind of more direct, kind of concrete answer, is sleep. I mean, these kids, their sleep patterns are so bad. And it's not their fault, because they have to stay up till midnight doing a P-set or problem set. That's what the terminology at Stanford, P-set, for their physics class, because like they didn't have time to do it because they were in class and then athletic training and then they had a lift and then they had practice. So, I think prioritizing sleep is really hard for them. And we never want to be like, no, go to sleep instead of do your homework, because that's not my place to tell them that. But man, if they can get a hold on their sleep and get like 8 hours of real sleep, what a difference that makes.
I think that goes for a lot of people too. Like a lot of the people
Yes.
that we work with as well. I mean, people just don't seem to sleep. I don't know what it is, but then once you catch up
or
on
the
it, you're like,
TV's
oh.
on. Yeah.
Mhm.
Or the TV's on and it's like not good sleep or whatever it is. Yes. Dark, quiet, cold. That's
And that might be tough as an athlete too, because you have a roommate who is
totally
watching TV,
Yes.
or they
Yes.
have their friends
Right.
over, or they're partying
Right.
at night. So it's hard for you to get a night's sleep. And that's
Totally.
in any other adult situation. Most likely you'd be able to control that situation in general, right?
Totally.
But it's tough as a college athlete. So
100%.
I could see where that can be tough.
Yeah. Even when they're like, Katie, I did so good. I was in bed by 10, but my roommate came back at 2. And it's like, yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
So what's something that you've been working on professionally, personally, physically, mentally, anything that you've been excited about lately?
I mean, I think like right now, we're, in August, seems like the world has fallen apart. So something I personally have been working on more recently is kind of my patience. That's for me. And just kind of being okay with these uncontrollables, right? Because I think it's pretty clear that a lot of things recently have been so out of our control. And so being okay with that. So that's kind of my own thing I've been working on. I downloaded the Calm app and I'm working on some mindfulness, which is really, really hard for me, but is good and necessary. And just being quiet. And with that, I think comes patience. Professionally, I have really been kind of diving into this, like, I love college athletics, and I think now college athletics is definitely like under a microscope. And again, that's a whole nother podcast, college athletics in the time of COVID. But something that I've been personally really interested in and doing this is kind of the administrative side. So as one of my administrative duties within our department, I work on our kind of policy and procedure manual, whatever you want to call it, operation guide. And so I've been really immersing myself in kind of these like intricacies. So like the difference between a policy and a standard operating procedure, and like what needs a policy and how do you write a policy, and like, do you want to be super specific in a policy, or do you want to leave it a little bit vague and allow it to have some wiggle room? And do we need a policy for everything? Do we need a policy for nothing? And so we have been, myself and a group of like 6 other athletic trainers on our department have been taking a deep dive into this, and rewriting and redoing a lot of our policy and procedure, and making sure that it's accurate, but also not too pigeonholed. And we have a policy manual within our whole department outside of athletic training that we have contributed to, because like there are certain policies that we need just for our athletic training room, like for example, ice immersion, like when do we dunk, how do we dunk, do we take rectal temp, all that stuff. And then there's also policies that the whole department need to know, like how do we qualify a medical red shirt, or how does insurance get paid for, or our air quality policy, because obviously that's going to be involved with events and administration and canceling things and postponing things. So it's kind of, it's such an like massive project, but it's a very good thought exercise in how do we operate a college athletic training department and then a college athletics department. And obviously I'm low on the totem pole in the athletic department as a whole, but it's interesting to have these conversations with people around you that don't work within sports medicine and getting different perspectives. So that's a personal thing I've been working on, kind of broadening my perspective on college athletics outside of sports medicine.
It's so important, like policies and procedures in, whether that is in, any business or the military, you have to revive that information and relook at it and evaluate what you're doing in general. So I think that's an awesome thing. And I think, and we try not to talk about COVID a lot, but I think that it gives people, in a sense, some type of reset that we didn't necessarily expect, but it's a forced way for us to really reevaluate, whether it's in our practice, whether it's in our policies and procedures, or just in our life in general. So I think it is a forced way for us to, hey, let's just take some time and let's think about stuff, let's reflect, and let's do some of that information so we can make better decisions in general.
Yeah. And I think also it doesn't make sense as a profession, all healthcare professions, to preach continuing education if we're not also doing it in writing, right? Like I can go take this Con Ed course and I can learn how to dry needle, and that's great. But if I'm not also then updating a policy on best practices in management on that dry needling, I don't know if it's worth it. Stuff like that.
Definitely. So I want to ask you another question, kind of piggybacking on, on a program when people come into college or doing athletics that they were missing. But let's talk about something they're doing really well, as whether it's a club team or a, high school sports or whatever. What are people doing really well?
I think people are understanding the importance of healthcare. I think we're seeing less of this. We still see it, but less of this, no, I'm fine, I'll just rub some dirt in it, to this shift of like, Katie, I'm not hurt, but I can feel myself getting hurt. Is there anything we can do to prevent that? That's like the dream, right? Like instead of treating a torn hamstring because we're at a grade 2 sprain because they didn't address it and now they're out for 4 to 6 weeks. Oh yeah, let's do a week of treatment. Let's modify 1 week of runs and then you're fine. I mean, that's beautiful. That's prevention. That's what we want. So I think that a lot more college athletes coming in are understanding the importance of maintenance and healthcare and recovery, and coming to the athletic trainer for minor things that we can fix up front and then not have bigger issues down the line. Again, it's a slow process, but I'm finding that to be a really good positive shift.
So where do you think that occurred at? Is that's something that we sometimes have issues with our athletes and sometimes not. So we have some people that are pretty intuitive, and then they're like, hey, my elbow feels a little sticky today. Like, could you look at it for me? And then we have other people that are like, oh, I guess I can just wait till I have surgery on it. That's probably something else you could do before then. So how does that information get to the athletes that it's okay to tell you if there's something minor going on, or, more of a prevention?
Right. Again, I'm not trying to like plug athletic training too much, because like I said, it could be a whole separate podcast, but I think we're getting more athletic trainers in high schools and more PTs that they're working with either in a clinic setting or just healthcare in general. So I think the access to medical professionals that specialize in sport is good. And we're seeing that more. And then I think also seeing professional athletes Normatec in their room, and they'll put it on social media like that. People are like, what's a Normatec? What does that do? Like, whatever it is. And so I think it's twofold. I think it's access at the high school level. And I think then it's also seeing that the pros are putting an emphasis on this. And again, that could be social media or these other things. But if you see Steph Curry in a cold tub and you're a 17-year-old high school basketball player, you're probably going to go into a cold tub. even if you don't know what it is or if you need it.
I think social media definitely has a role into it because, you think about maybe 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, the only way we would be able to see behind the scenes of somebody training, whether that's like, like making the music video, like I'm dating
Right.
myself by saying that, but you go into that, but you didn't have access to be able to be like, hey, this is what my training looks like. This is how I recover. That was not there unless you had a video camera on you and they're interviewing you at the same time. But now it's like,
Yeah.
hey, they're just taking a video and be like, this is what I'm doing right now. Watch me in this cold tub. And I'm just going to sit here for 5 minutes and freeze my butt off. But then it's open to the public, but that gives us, I think, more information. So like you said, in general, that shift of these younger athletes knowing that recovery is important, or like being prevention is even a thing. And I think it's like social media is a good and bad thing in some senses, right?
Totally.
It provides us with so much more tangible information that we can use, but also that whole mental thing that we talked about in general, it can go into a very bad spiral if that happens in a negative way.
Yeah. Access to information.
All right, Katie. Well, another question here. What is something you've learned and wish you knew sooner?
I think we'll kind of bring this back to the ego. So I'm really like, I harp on ego. And again, I'm nowhere near perfect, but I had to really shift my mindset when I left grad school and started athletic training. So I was kind of like a hot shot in grad school. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. Like, I was top of my class. I crushed it. I was so proud of myself. And then so coming into my first year of professional practice, I was like, oh, I got this. And then you're like, oh, I do not have this. Turns out I do not have this. And while it was like a crash course in ego, it was one of the best things that could happen to me. And I looked to some of my mentors when I was a young athletic trainer, namely Scott Anderson, who I love and look up to. And he helped me along the path of shifting from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And I don't know if you've read the book Mindset by Carol Dweck. She's a Stanford professor. It's my favorite book.
Great book.
And great book. And I had always grown up with this perfectionist kind of mentality and thinking that failure was bad. And I had done fairly well in school, all through grad school, undergrad, high school, and just like generally been kind of like just excelled, as a lot of us do. And coming to a place where I failed miserably was such an eye-opener, but also learning that failure isn't bad. It's only bad if you don't like harness it and learn from it. So my first year as a young athletic trainer was rough, but it was invaluable. And I think shifting this mindset out of fixed, meaning I failed, so I'm bad, into growth, I failed, so this is an opportunity to learn. And none of these traits that have caused me to fail are set. I mean, like intelligence is not set, talent is not set, work ethic is not set. You can change these things, you can control these things. So how do I get smarter? I read more. How do I get a better work ethic? I work on my time management. How do I get a better attitude? How do I work on my ego? All these things. So that's, and I say I wish I knew it sooner. I wouldn't really change my development because I think it's made me who I am today. But I just kind of wish like I knew it was coming, because it really hit me like a ton of bricks and I was not ready. Like your first year transitioning into practice from school is so hard. And it doesn't matter what profession you're in, truly. I mean, that first year of working at Google versus working at a hospital, working versus a college, like out of college, like it's going to be tough, and hopefully you're ready for it. But if you're not, read Mindset.
It seems like that same thing transitioned from that high level athlete, right? It sounds like
Totally.
a very similar transition of you have everything and you're the top of everything, and then you go to Stanford and then
You're not.
Your dreams might be crushed a little bit, but you can get through it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they actually require, or maybe they used to, or maybe this is an urban legend. I thought they used to require every college freshman at Stanford to read the book Mindset because it was written by a Stanford professor, or it was like, maybe it's part of like one of their freshman orientation classes or something. Cause truly, like, learning that you can change your circumstance is one of the most powerful things people can learn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what is something that you want to leave the listeners with?
Okay, I will try not to make this too like timely, because I think I could say a lot of things about kind of where we're at in athletics in the current moment. So I'll kind of leave it as, I think one of the most important things and the reason why I love athletic training and working at the collegiate level is the relationships that I form with people. And I think that in any profession that you do, especially the medical profession, I think relationships are the beauty and the kind of concrete foundation of your clinical practice, whether that's your relationship with your patients, your relationship with your coworkers, your relationship with your colleagues, your relationship with the athletic trainer you met once at a conference that maybe down the line will be a great resource for you. So networking and relationship building is really, really important, almost just as important as all the continuing education we take, to be better clinicians. Like if you can take a class on dry needling or, cupping or kettlebells or whatever it is, great. But if you can also take a professional development class on how to network, working across generations, like talking to a generation that isn't your generation, if you're generation X, how to talk to millennials, whatever it may be, is one of the most important things. Because I think when we create meaningful relationships within our workplace, especially medicine, it transforms our ability to provide quality patient care.
Very good. And how can people find you?
So I am on social media, but I also work for our district and Stanford and do our social media. So I don't put as much effort into my own personal social media. So the best way, if you want to directly connect with me, would be email, which is ksuskin@stanford.edu. Or you can find me on the Stanford staff directory, if you go to gostanford.com, and that email is on there. And then if you want to connect or follow some of the stuff we do within Stanford Sports Medicine, we have a Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. It's at @SU_sportsmed on Twitter and Instagram. So if you want to follow me personally, that's option, or you can follow us at Stanford, which is probably cooler than me.
We'll put those in the show notes, so we'll have those available as well.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
But Katie, thank you so much for your time. That was such an interesting conversation. Just kind of get your input about college athletics and kind of just give people an idea, if they want to become an athletic trainer or just like kind of work in that setting, or if you're an athlete and you want to kind of go to that next level, what things that you can probably get some tips from and how to do that.
Yeah. Always open to good discussion. Love that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Take care and stay safe out there in the Bay Area.
You too.
We'd like to thank you for listening to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We hope you enjoyed the time with our guests as much as we did. It would help us out so much if you could share, subscribe, or review our podcast, or any combination of the three. Thanks again, and remember to take care of yourself.